Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Lamb and welcome to How to Animate a Landscape Painting in Adobe After Effects. Using a painting by Henrik Evensen, we'll teach you how to add these stunning and eye-catching animations to your scene. Other topics we cover will include how to prepare your landscape environment, how to animate atmospheric particles, how to animate grass, and how to loop your animation. By the end of the course, you'll have a better understanding of these tools and how to animate a landscape painting in Adobe After Effects.
Hey video creators! With Envato Elements, you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial licenses for one low cost. Because no matter which video you're creating, Envato Elements has everything you need. Get creative with unlimited downloads of royalty-free stock footage, video templates, audio, and millions of other creative assets.
Whoa.
All right, people, let's move on. So this is where Mike stands, and this is where the dinosaur comes in.
Yeah, Envato Elements is where you find and download everything. Motion graphics, dinosaurs, and create even more with social media assets, online content, everything.
Everything. Literally everything.
Music tracks, sound effects. Thank you. Everything you need for your videos, it's all unlimited. Deliver better videos faster with Envato Elements. Get started today.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, we'll learn how to prepare your painting in Photoshop. So when preparing your painting or environment, it's important to split up the image into elements that you plan to animate. So looking at this particular painting here, you'll want things like the grass to move and sway with the wind. Other elements that will give life to the painting may be more subtle. So things like the smoke and clouds in the background, and even the sunlight here will have its own layer. So let's take a look at the layer panel here to see how this is done. I find the best way to lay out your layers is to imagine you're removing elements of the scene starting from the foreground all the way to the background. So let's go through these by switching them off one by one to see how it all works. So starting with the light rays, if you see how I switch these off, how this affects the scene, like so. I've also included the highlights with the light rays, so you can see how the light rays affect things like the grass, the buildings, and the mountains, just to add a little bit more detail to the lighting effects. So let's go ahead and close these. Next, we have the foreground. Now you'll notice here how I've labeled these folders according to what I mentioned before. So all the foreground elements are placed inside the first folder, which is named foreground, the midground elements in the second folder, and the background elements in the third folder called background here. And now also here we've got the final folder called the sky for the sky and the clouds. These have all been color coded just to make things easier as well. So let's go ahead and open up the foreground folder here. And you'll see that we've got things like the tree to the right here. We've got the foreground grass and some more grass layers. Now these have all been separated so that they can be animated individually. The more layers of grass we have, the more natural and alive our painting is going to feel. So let's go ahead and close our foreground layer. Next we have our midground. Now these consist of more grass layers here, like so, and also the houses and some smoke. Let's go ahead and close this. Now we have the background layer, which again has more grass for us to potentially animate, and also things like the trees and the mountain. And then finally, we have the sky. Now, for the sky and the clouds, you'll notice how a significant portion of the clouds is actually covered by the mountain. Now, it's important that we need these hidden parts of the cloud so that we can animate them. And a good way to test this is to emulate the animation by moving the clouds like so from side to side, like this. Excellent. So now that we have a better understanding of how our environment and layers are constructed, let's go ahead and head over to the next lesson where we'll go into After Effects and animate them. See you all there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to animate grass so that it looks like it's gently swaying in the wind. So let's start by first importing our Photoshop file into After Effects by going to File, Import, and File. Navigate to the location of your PSD file, select it, and then we want to import as composition and retain layer sizes. Check Create Composition and uncheck Photoshop Sequence, and then click Import. Select Editable Layer Styles from the options here, and then click OK. This will create a new comp in After Effects with all your Photoshop layers. So let's go ahead and double click on the comp here. Excellent. And now you'll find all the layers ordered as they were in the Photoshop file at the bottom here. Let's go ahead and double click on the foreground comp here. And this will also open up the foreground folder where you'll see that we've got all of our foreground layers here, like so. Now, before we begin, we just want to make sure that our composition has the right time duration. So our animation is going to be 5 minutes. So right click on the tab here, go to Composition Settings, and we're going to change this to 5 minutes. Like so. Click OK once you've done that. And now from here, we're going to select one of these grass layers. So let's hide all of our grass layers, all the other layers like so. And we're just going to concentrate on this grass layer here. So let's select that. And then once you've done that, we want to add a CC slant effect to this by going to Effect and then going to Distort and then finding CC slant, like so. This will add the effect to the layer, which you can see on the Effects and Controls panel here. Now, if we go ahead and change the slant value here, you'll see how it affects the grass, like so. Let's make a few adjustments here before we animate it. Now we want to take a note of the floor location here, as this is where our grass is going to be rooted. So click on the target icon here, and then click on where you want the floor to be. So we want the floor of our grass to be just underneath, like so. And you'll see how that affects our animation, like that. Now if we, for example, placed the floor in the middle, you'll notice how the animation doesn't look quite right, as it's moving both the top and the bottom of the grass. So let's keep the floor at the bottom here, like so. And now we're ready to start animating the grass. Let's go ahead and open up the grass layer until we can see our CC slant options. And now we want to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and also click on the slant option here, like so. This will allow us to type in the expression dialog box here. So we're going to type in a little expression here, which is wiggle, open brackets, and then a time value, which we're going to go with 0.8, for example, add a comma here, and then a wiggle value, which we're going to go with 10 as an example, and then close the brackets. Excellent. Now this means that the wiggle animation will move between a value of 1 to 10 every 0.8 seconds. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and preview our animation, like so. Excellent. And now you'll see we've got this cool, subtle grass swaying in the wind animation. Now this is a great way to have some grass animation quickly and easily. However, we don't get a lot of control with this technique, which can become a little bit of a problem if we wanted to add keyframes or loop the animation by having the first and the last frame of this animation exactly the same. So an example of this is if we play the animation from the very end here, like so, you'll notice how that as the animation reaches the very end, it sort of twitches. Now we don't want that, so let's go ahead and fix this by attaching some sliders. So again, make sure that the grass layer is selected, and then we want to go to Effect, and then Expression Controls, and then Slider Control. Let's go ahead and rename this slider into the Time Slider. And then let's go ahead and create another one. So Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control. And we want to rename this the Wiggle Slider. Awesome. Now we need to attach the values to our sliders. So let's go back to our expression. And we want to highlight the 0.8 value here, like so. And then we want to go over to the pick whip, which is down here, not the pick whip for the layer. We want to use the expression pick whip, and then just click and drag it over to our time slider, like so. Excellent. And now we want to do the same with our value here. So our wiggle value. So let's go ahead and highlight the 10, use the pick whip, and then slide it over to the wiggle slider, like that. Excellent. And now we can use these sliders to control our wiggle animation using keyframes. So let's drag our timeline to the very beginning of the timeline here. And we want to add a keyframe for both the time slider and the wiggle slider by clicking on the stopwatch buttons, like so. Now we can also go ahead and see how this is affected in our timeline. So let's go ahead and open these up like that. And now we can see the two keyframes at the bottom here. Now we want to make sure that the value is set to 0. So at the very beginning, the value of our wiggle is both at 0. And now we want to go forwards 1 frame. So let's zoom in here so you can see what we're doing. So we don't want to move forwards too much. So let's move forwards 1 frame. And now let's enter a value for our sliders. So for the time slider, let's enter a value of 0.7. And for the wiggle slider, let's enter a value of 10. And this will start the animation. So now you'll see we've got our next two keyframes 1 frame apart, like so. Now let's move forward to about 3 minutes, like that. And then let's add another keyframe for both sliders. So let's click on the keyframe button here, like that. And we want to keep the values the same. So 0.7 and 10. And then let's go all the way to the very last frame. And then let's click on the keyframe buttons again here. But this time we want to reset the we want to set the values back down to 0, like so. So this means that the last frame of our animation is a value of 0 for both the time and the wiggle, and also a value of 0 on the first frame, meaning that our first and last frames match and that our animation will be looping. So let's go ahead and preview that. Excellent. So now we've got a nice smooth animation for our grass. Now just repeat the same steps for the other grass layers, just to create a field of swaying grass. In the next class, we'll learn how to animate the sunlight. See you all there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to animate the sun rays to light up the scene using keyframes. Now to animate the light rays, let's go back to our original PSD comp here, and then just select the light rays layer. Now the aim of this is to create a subtle change in opacity throughout the animation to give a feeling of passing clouds overhead. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're at the very beginning of our timeline. And also, just as before, let's go ahead and change the duration of our composition to 5 minutes. So let's change this like so. And then click OK. And now we want to open up the light rays until we can see our opacity options, like so. Excellent. Now all we have to do is create a keyframe for opacity and then just move forwards a little bit and then change the opacity either up or down. So in this case, I'm moving it up to 80% and then move forward slightly again and then moving back down again. So let's change this down to 55 and then move forwards a little bit and then move it up. And then just sort of repeating the process, going up and then back down, alternating between increasing and decreasing, like so, with each keyframe. Excellent. Now keep in mind that when we do this, we want to randomize the opacity values and the distance a little bit, just to keep things looking as natural as possible. Now once you've got enough keyframes, simply click and drag to highlight these keyframes like so. Press Ctrl C to copy them, move forwards in the timeline, and then press Ctrl V to paste them, like so. Just to fill it up, so just filling up the timeline like that. And then once we go towards the end of our animation, we want to create a keyframe right at the end which matches the same value as our first keyframe. So for this example, our value for our first frame is 60%. So that will be the same value for our last keyframe, like so. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and highlight all of these keyframes like so. Press Ctrl C to copy them. Now open up the highlights layer here. And we want to do the same for the opacity over here as well. So go ahead and press Ctrl V to paste the exact same keyframes. And now you'll notice that the highlights of our animation will also follow the same opacity values as our sun rays. Excellent. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to animate atmospheric particles. See you all there.
Hey video creators, with Envato Elements you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial licenses for one low cost. Because no matter which video you're creating, Envato Elements has everything you need. Get creative with unlimited downloads of royalty-free stock footage, video templates, audio, and millions of other creative assets.
Whoa.
All right, people, let's move on. So this is where Mike stands, and this is where the dinosaur comes in.
Yeah, Envato Elements is where you find and download everything. Motion graphics, dinosaurs. and create even more with social media assets, online content, everything.
Everything. Literally everything.
Music tracks, sound effects. Thank you. Everything you need for your videos, it's all unlimited. Deliver better videos faster with Envato Elements. Get started today.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, we'll learn how to animate some particles for some additional atmosphere. So to add particles, we'll first need to create a new layer by going to Layer, New, and Solid. Let's rename this Particles. And then make sure that the color of the background is black. And then click OK. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and make sure that this layer is at the very top of our layer stack. And then with this layer selected, let's go to Effect. And then try and find Simulation. And then go to CC Particle World. Click on that, and this will apply the CC Particle World to the layer. Now let's go ahead and bring our attention to the Effect Controls panel. So make sure that the Effect Controls panel is opened up. And we want to open up Grids and Guides. And straight away, let's go ahead and uncheck Grids, like so. And then also uncheck Horizon and the Axis box. Then we want to go to the Particle options. So open up the Particle options here. And then from here, we want to change the particle type from line to a faded sphere. And you'll see how that affects our look of the particles straight away. Now let's change the color of our particles. So let's go over to Birth Color, click on the color box here, and let's change this color to FFD5C7. And we want to change the Death color as well. So just sort of choosing the same color as our birth color and then just making it slightly darker, like that. Excellent. So that means that when our particles are born, there will be a lighter color and then slowly fade into a darker color as they disappear. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and change some other options. So we want the birth size of our particles to be a value of 0.1. And then the death size, let's change that to a value of 0.01. The size variation, we'll have it at 50%, and the max opacity at 75%. Cool. So now once we've got that done, let's go ahead and close Particle. And now let's head over to the Producer tab and open that up. And we want to change some of these settings. This is where our particles are going to sort of emanate from. This is where they're going to travel from. So let's go to the X radius here and increase that. And we want to increase that to a value of around 0.8, like so. And then let's go to the Y radius and let's increase that to a value of around 1. And then we want to increase the Z radius here as well to a value of, let's say, something like 1 as well. Cool. So just playing around with these values here. And we can also move the position of our producer. So let's move this down here, like so. So this is where our particles are going to sort of rise up from. So let's move that down. And then from here, what we want to do now is we want to animate our particles. So let's go ahead and close down the Producer tab. And let's go ahead and go over to the Physics tab, which is how our particles are going to animate. So let's move forwards in our timeline here so we can see where our particles are going to look like. And let's go ahead and change the animation type from explosive to twirly. And then we want to change the gravity here to minus 0.01. And then from here, let's go over to velocity. And we want to change this to 0.3. And then we want to go over to the resistance and change this to 0.5, like so. Excellent. Now that we've got our particles moving, let's go back to the producer here just to adjust where our particles are going to be seen in our painting. So let's change the position to 0.3. Change the X radius to 0.8. Change the Y radius to 0.4. And the Z radius, let's round that to 1, like so. And now you'll see our particles are a little bit more spread out in our composition. Excellent. Now let's go over to the longevity and change that from 1 to 5, just so that our particles last a little bit longer, and you'll see how this affects our composition. We've got a lot more particles populating our painting now. And now let's go over to the birth rate and change that from 2 to 0.2, like so, just to reduce that back down a little bit. Excellent. Now if we sort of scrub backwards and forwards, you can see how our particles are animating in our timeline. Excellent. Now let's add a glow to our particles. So with the particles layer still selected, let's go to Effect, go to Stylize, and now find Glow. So click on that to add that here. And here we want to change a few of these settings. So let's go ahead and make sure the glow threshold is at 60 and the radius is at 15. Intensity is at 1. And from here, let's change the color a little bit. So let's change the color to a nice sort of yellow glow, like so. And now we can see how that sort of affects our particles if we zoom in here. So if we sort of zoom in to one of these particles, we can remove the effects and bring it back on, and you can see how that gives our particles a nice subtle glow effect, like so. Excellent. Let's go ahead and fit this to the screen again. Now to ensure that the animation is looping, let's go ahead and add a fade in and fade out for our particles layer. So let's move all the way back to the beginning of our timeline, open up the transform options, create a keyframe for opacity, move forwards a little bit. In fact, make sure the opacity for the first keyframe is set at 0, move forwards a little bit, and then bring it up to 100. And then the same for our ending keyframe. So you can see here, as we zoom in, how we've got a opacity of 0 moving up to 100. And then at the very last keyframe, let's change that from 100. So add a keyframe for 100 here, and then a keyframe at the very end for 0. So now our particles slowly fade out, and then at the beginning of the animation, they will fade back in again. So that's how we loop them. Excellent. And there you have it, some atmospheric particles for your environment. In the next video, we'll learn how to animate the sky and the clouds. See you all there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to animate the sky and the clouds. So let's begin by opening up the sky comp here by double clicking on it. And here you'll see our cloud layers and the sky layer. And we're just going to go ahead and hide both of the cloud layer and the sky layer for now, just so that we can concentrate on one cloud at a time. Now, to loop this animation, we need to duplicate our first cloud layer. So select this and then press Ctrl D on the keyboard to duplicate it. And let's go ahead and hide the duplicate cloud for now. And from here, what we're going to do is at the start of our timeline, just open up our cloud layer here, move to the very start of our timeline. We're going to add a position keyframe here, like so. And then from here, we're going to move all the way to the very end of our timeline. Now you'll notice that this animation has a longer timeline for the rest of our compared to the rest of our animation. So we're going to need to do what we did previously, which is to right click on our comp, go to composition settings, and then just change the duration to 5 minutes. Like so. And then once we've done that, we can move all the way to the very end of our timeline, which is now set to 5 minutes, and then just change the position of our cloud until it reaches the very right of our screen, like so. And this will add a keyframe here. So if we scrub back and forth on our timeline, you'll notice how our cloud now moves from the left to the right. Now we want to do the same with our duplicate cloud, except this time we want it to move from the left to the right and go back to the original position from our first keyframe, just so that we can loop it. So let's go all the way to the end of our timeline. Let's hide our first cloud, and we want to create a keyframe here for the position, like so. So it ends in exactly the same position that it begins, or at least our first cloud begins. And now let's go to the very beginning of our timeline and change this position so that it is to the very left of our screen, like so. And this will create a keyframe here. So now you'll see it moves from the left to the right, which is the first keyframe of our first cloud. So now you'll see that if we play this animation here, it should loop quite smoothly to the next animation, like so. Excellent. And if you want to have more clouds in the sky, just simply repeat that process for another cloud. And there we have it. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to add a music track to our animation. See you all there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Animated Landscape Painting course. In this lesson, we'll learn how to add a music track to the video. So first, let's grab a track from Envato Elements, which is the website full of stock images, videos, and music for you to download. So create an account by clicking on the top button here. And then once you've done that, you'll have access to all the assets on the website. Now, in the search menu here, let's go ahead and type in lo-fi hip hop chill. And then in all items, we're going to select the music selection here, and then just hit the search button. Now in the results page, we're going to download and use the first option here, but feel free to use your own music for the project. Now back in After Effects, we're going to import our downloaded music track by going to File, Import, and File. Go to the location containing the file, select it, and then click on Import. Here you'll find the file located in the project panel. So just click and drag it into the comp to add it in. And here I've just added it to the bottom of our layers. And you'll see now that we've added the music track into our composition. So let's go ahead and open up our music layer to see what options we have. And here you'll see that we've got audio levels. Now, increasing the value or decreasing the value will make our audio louder or softer. So you can see if we open up the waveform here, how this will affect our sound. Excellent. So with that, we've come to the end of the animated landscape painting course. Now that you understand the basics of how to create an animated painting, you can experiment with different ones of your own, such as using different images and even photos. I had a lot of fun creating this course, so thanks for watching, good luck creating your own animated landscape paintings, and I'll see you next time on Tuts Plus.